We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Wednesday edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix, and we are back on the beam after being away for what seems like an eternity, but it was really only 2 official shows. We left off last Wednesday, just before Thanksgiving, having the pre-Thanksgiving show, and then we took a break on Friday because that was really my official Thanksgiving, since I didn't really celebrate Thanksgiving on Thursday. So I took that day off. And then on Monday, I was in Boulder, Colorado at Dagan TV shooting the first of 3 episodes that will show up later. I think it'll be this month. We're going to be going to a 1-per-week episode format over at Dagan. And I'll actually be back there on Sunday night to shoot another 4 episodes starting on Monday and Tuesday. So that's the 11th house, and that's over on Dagan TV. And you can go to Dagan TV and find that and sign up for it. It's a great deal. There's so much fantastic content going through the Dagan media stream that the price to sign up is an utter bargain. It's an electronic mystery school. That's how I like to describe it. So let's get into today's show. I'm really happy to have a guest. Every now and then I do bring some other astrologers on here to break up the monotony and bring another angle of wisdom and thoughts and I guess we would call it infotainment. And today I have the honor to bring on a really good astrologer. His name is Nick Dagan Best, and I've been sort of following Nick peripherally for a while, and he's got a book that just came out a few months back called Uranus USA, and it's about the Uranus and Gemini cycles here in this country and how they've impacted our culture, our history, and the times that we live in. And Nick decided to go for kind of an illustrated version of describing this cycle. We're going to get into that with him. And then in the second hour, we're going to branch off and do what we normally do here on Wednesday, open up the phone lines and do some free, quick, live readings. All right, so let's get to it. I think this is Nick. Let's click through, find out, and jump into Uranus USA. Hello there.
Hey, Robert. Hi, Robert. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Nick. Hey, you're welcome. Thanks for coming on. It's great to have you on. Excited to get into this topic. And welcome to navigating the astrological matrix. First off, I kind of wanted to get a sense as to where you are physically. I went to your website. It says you're Montreal. Is that correct, or where are you calling us from?
That is correct. I'm in the island city of Montreal.
Okay, great. So one of the things I wanted to ask you. This is kind of what I do with a lot of the astrologers that come on here. I'm always curious as to discovering and finding out how you got turned on to astrology. When was that moment, and when did it kind of click for you when you said to yourself, hey, this is really interesting, it's special, and I want to devote a large portion of my life to it?
Yeah, well, that time was about 19 years ago. It'll be 19 years next month, January of 95. My story is somewhat typical, as I understand it, because I originally became interested in just reading astrology books so that I would know enough to debunk it. It was not a subject I took seriously, largely because, like a lot of people, I didn't know anything about it. And I had some friends in my circle who were sort of superficially interested in it. And so, smart aleck that I am, I thought I would learn enough about it so that I could tell them why it was all silliness. But of course, the joke was on me because I soon became convinced of its validity, of its real presence in the world. That it wasn't just something that people believed in, but rather it's part of the force of nature of which we understand so little. And I guess the way that happened for me before I studied astrology, there's a sort of a trait that runs in my family. I come from a family of history buffs and historians, and we all sort of memorized calendar dates, like at a sort of savant level. So even before I knew anything about astrology, I was just one of these people who knew a lot of dates, a lot of people's birthdays, a lot of historical dates, that kind of thing, as well as a pretty good memory for the chronology in my own life. And astrology is well, it's many things, but at its root, it's really sort of this big calendar. It's a means of measuring time, just like any calendar is. And that was my in with astrology, was because I have all these calendar dates memorized. I could, as soon as I understood what an ephemeris was, and you may want to explain that to your listeners, but just to sort of cut to the chase, I was able to look at an ephemeris and realize that, wow, these different planetary cycles and their movements, they really do coincide with a lot of really interesting stuff in biographies and in history. And I was able to recognize that pretty quickly because of this existing aptitude I had. And that really goes, that comes down to what I still do with astrology. For instance, the book I've just published that you mentioned, which is an examination of history and biography using this amazing calendar of astrology.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So you had your road to Damascus moment. You had your eyes opened. Yeah. You have the capacity to remember, understand dates, make correlations, make those connections. So now you believe that this actually works, that it is an applicable discipline. Now that's one level of cognition and understanding and acceptance. There's another level to take it to the professional space. How did that occur for you?
Well, it was really a matter, when I found astrology, I was about 26 years old. I was 26 years old, and I quite frankly had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. There was no field that appealed to me. There was nothing that made me feel. At that point, I was playing music for a living and enjoying that, but also understanding that I didn't want to make music a career. And it was probably within just about 2 months of studying astrology that I realized I wanted to devote my life to it and to the study of it. And by extension, I wanted to pursue it as a profession as well, because it was really just what I wanted to do with my life, morning, noon, and night. That was the basic motivation. I didn't immediately become a professional, of course. I studied on my own for a few years, and then I started taking classes with various teachers involved with the NCGR and going to conferences and gradually, just expanding my palette, studying a lot of different varieties of astrology and listening to a lot of different viewpoints, and then eventually, after a few years, knuckling down and getting really involved in my own research, my own sort of historical research. And it extended from there. And then within about 5-6 years of my beginning to study, I had a professional career going as a writer and as a consultant.
Good stuff. In fact, I think this year you're going to be speaking at the National Astrology Conference. Is that correct, in Arizona?
I will, yes. The ESAR conference at the end of September. I forget the exact dates. I think it's something like the 21st to the 24th, or it's around about there, so towards the end of September of 2014. Right. I will be at the ESAR conference doing a couple of talks. I'm also doing a few talks this coming spring, the Great Lakes Astrology Conference in April of 2014 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I've also got some other things in the works in New York City and possibly St. Louis and Minnesota. So, yeah, lots of appearances.
Excellent. So when I think of memory and the ability to memorize dates, the two signs that come to mind for me are Virgo and Cancer. Do you have any Virgo and Cancer in your chart?
Yeah, I have no Cancer whatsoever, but I'll qualify that in a second. I do have 4 planets stellium in Virgo.
There we go.
So that's there. And while I don't have any planets in Cancer, and I'm Leo rising, so Cancer is my 12th house. I do have a Taurus moon right on the midheaven, and the moon is the memory planet, and that's an exalted moon, pretty high up there in the chart. And I'll tell you, I've got a database of over 10,000 birth charts in my software that I use for study purposes. And one of the only people I know who had a Taurus moon on the midheaven like I do was Bobby Fischer, the chess champion, who had every possible chess move memorized. Like when you played chess with Bobby Fischer, he knew any possible move by heart that you could make in chess. And so it's an interesting correlation between he and I. I'm only a mediocre chess player, but I think if I were serious about chess, I would probably do the same thing that Bobby Fischer did, because it's just a certain kind of aptitude, and it's a strange thing, because it's not necessarily a case of having a good memory. It's really just having an aptitude to memorize a certain kind of thing. I'd say overall, my memory is probably about average with any other human being. It's just a certain kind of focus, and I think the same thing was true of Bobby Fischer. It's not like he remembered everything in his life, with photographic accuracy. It was just an aptitude to remember chess moves.
Was his birthday March 9th? Was that when he was born?
That's a good question. I can look that up pretty quickly. I don't know offhand.
I think it's March. I know he's a Pisces. I think it was March 9th.
Well, that could be right. I can look it up pretty quickly. But yeah, a Taurus moon on the midheaven is part of what I attribute this all to. Let's see, I've got my Bobby. Yes, March 9th.
What was that?
March 9th, Bobby Fischer is March 9th, 1943. 2:39 p.m. in Chicago. Yeah.
He shares the same birthday as Yuri Gagarin, March 9th.
Okay, yeah.
Let's get into this Taurus moon. It's exalted up on the midheaven. What a great placement for the moon. What degree is it at?
It's at almost 3 degrees. So what we often call
almost 3 degrees. That is considered, from what I've read, not only just the most exalted position for the moon, but the most exalted degree for the moon itself, right?
Correct. And that's what Bobby Fischer had too.
All right, incredible. Wow, cool stuff. Let's get into your book. So it just came out recently, and you decided to go down the path of kind of an illustrated exploration of these Uranus Gemini cycles. What prompted you to go in that direction?
Well, it's kind of a graphic novel. I mean, it's not a graphic novel in the sense like a paneled comic book, but it does have artwork on every page, and it's full color. And it's an illustrated full color book. It's not a full-on graphic novel. And I guess my motivation for that just has to do with the zeitgeist. Graphic novels and comic books tend to be where today's intelligentsia go for their literary entertainment. I think the minds, the great minds of today, the young minds anyway, you'll often find them in the comic book store and not necessarily at Barnes and Nobles. So that was part of my motivation, was just trying to reach a certain demographic, I guess. And another was a real determination, because of the kind of astrology I do, to not wind up in the same section of Barnes & Noble, not that my book can be found in Barnes & Noble at this point, but to not be found in the self-help section, because I'm doing a very different kind of astrology that is not that, I have a disclaimer at the beginning of my book that makes it pretty clear that nobody reading that book is going to learn anything about their own chart or their own lives, and there's going to be no advice involved. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but that I'm doing something different with astrology that involves more objectivity and more sort of looking at the outer world as opposed to one's sort of inner life, which is what I find a lot of astrological literature is aimed at. So some of it was also to simply draw a line in the sand and try to sort of carve my own territory in astrological literature. And doing a full-color illustrated book like this was just sort of a really, I guess, an overt statement.
Yeah, it's actually a really creative and unique idea. What I found really interesting, because you're trying to get into the sort of the psyche of a demographic that has been raised on graphic novels and comics and video games, and that's how they digest information. Of course, I'm talking about the millennials, who the majority of which have Pluto and Scorpio, and they tend to have kind of an occult and esoteric thread running through that culture. Have you had any kind of contact with that demographic and that Pluto group as a result of your creating this book?
Well, I'd say I already had that audience existing, just in terms of the people who show up at my workshops or when I speak at conferences. That's already part of my existing audience, even before I became a self-published author. So I'd say definitely, and as a result of the book, it's increased my my exposure to that group of people. But indeed, back in 1999, at which point I'd been studying astrology for 4 years, and I was projecting a career for myself. The Harry Potter phenomenon was just taking off, and it occurred to me that these 8, 9, 10-year-olds who were getting hooked on Harry Potter in 1999, they'd be college age by the time I started publishing books. So there was sort of a long-term strategy, I suppose. Although at the end of the day, I did make this book as a work of art, in that I made it simply because I wanted it to exist in the world. So I'd say first it was a work of art, and secondly it's a commercial venture. But yeah, there was a strategy there. There was certainly, the idea that, like I said, the Harry Potter millennials of the turn of the century would be college age by the time I published a book like this. Right. I've been planning on doing this book for about 10 years or so before I eventually got around to doing it. So there was some sort of long-term vision, I guess, on my part.
I'm absolutely fascinated by the long-term cycles, the Pluto cycles, Neptune cycles, and obviously the Uranus cycles. So let's get into the Uranus cycles. And you're really focusing on Uranus and Gemini in this book, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. I have other things that I plan on writing about Uranus. But for this book, I wanted to start with a very simple structure. So I thought about, talking about one planet in one sign, as opposed to sort of just glossing through the 12 signs of the zodiac, which is what an astrology book would normally do. What I wanted to explore with this is just looking at what happens when one planet enters one sign. And in the case of Uranus, of course, because it's a slower cycle, Uranus takes 84 years to go around the zodiac. So it's the perfect length of time. At the end of the day, the book is about Uranus, and it's about the United States, but at the end of the day, what it's really about is the tropical zodiac. That was the reason I structured this book the way I did, was to really reinforce the idea of the 12 signs of the tropical zodiac being like 12 rooms in a house. And what happens when this one body enters one of these, quote-unquote rooms. And the background to this is also, the reason I chose the United States is I could write a Uranus book about Russian history, about Canadian history, British history, but there was a specific reason why I chose the United States, and that's because Uranus was discovered in 1781, the same year that the American Revolution ended. So there's a sort of narrative thread between the American Revolution and the discovery of Uranus. As I mentioned in the book, when Uranus was discovered, William Herschel, the man who discovered the planet, it wasn't him who decided on the name Uranus, and he didn't even want to call it Herschel, which some people might know was what the planet was called before the name Uranus was chosen. Herschel wanted to call the planet George, named after King George III.
Right.
So if you can imagine, had he had his way, we'd be walking around talking about how George is square Pluto these days and things like that. And there's a beautiful tie-in with that, because King George III, of course, is also the king that the American Revolution was fought to overthrow or distance itself from. And to make things even more interesting, King George III had the sun in Gemini. And transiting Uranus in Gemini was conjunct his sun when the American colonials signed a treaty with France, bringing France into the war, which ultimately sealed his fate in terms of the outcome of the revolution. So there's this beautiful sort of narrative thing. That's the thing about the book is it is an astrology. It is a book that teaches you about astrology, but it's also a storybook. It also uses astrology and the astrological calendar to tell this very interesting story. And that was the thing that intrigued me, was I could see how there was a story in this. And that's another sort of justification for doing the illustrated book. It's not merely a textbook. It can serve as a textbook, but it's not merely a textbook. It's also a storybook, a historical storybook.
Let's get into the meat of the Uranus and Gemini cycle, which appears to be 1942 to 1949. It's a period of really potent change.
Yeah.
Do you want to just jump into that?
Sure. Yeah, indeed. The last time Uranus was in Gemini was in the 1940s. It made two ingresses. Uranus almost always makes two ingresses. The word ingress merely means to enter a new tropical sign. So what happens is that for your listeners who might not know much about planetary cycles, sort of move directly from point A to point B. They in their phase, they do what's called a retrograde. They appear to go backwards for a little while. And with Uranus, what happens is it'll enter a new sign once every 7 years, but it'll make one entrance or ingress into a sign, then it'll stop and go retrograde and go back into the previous sign, and then make a second ingress or entrance into the sign about 9 months later. So in the 1940s, the first ingress was in 1941, just prior to the United States getting involved in the Second World War. And by the second ingress in 1942, that's right when the United States is indeed fully involved in the Second World War. That span leads up to just prior to the period when the Soviet Union developed their own atom bomb. In other words, Uranus and Gemini had to do with the United States entering the Second World War after a period of isolation, becoming a great military power, of course, the development of the bomb and Hiroshima, and then this early part of the Cold War, where the United States was at that point the only superpower, prior to the Soviet Union sort of catching up in 1949. And there's what I do with the book is I draw parallels. The book has 3 chapters. The first chapter talks about the period of the American Revolution, because Uranus was also in Gemini from 1774 to 1781, the entirety of the American Revolution. And then if you jump ahead 84 years, Uranus was in Gemini from 1858 to 1865, going from the Lincoln-Douglas debates through the entirety of the Civil War, and then this period with the Second World War in the 40s. So what we see, I mean, obviously the United States has been involved in many wars in its history, but I think what's really distinct about the 3 wars I talk about in this book is that they're wars that led to the nation redefining itself. The United States of America effectively became a whole new country. Obviously, in 1781 with the end of the Revolution, 1865 at the end of the Civil War, and then 1949 with it suddenly finding itself in a place it didn't want to be 10 years prior, which was, this sort of reigning military global superpower, which, contrary to a lot of people's misconceptions, was not where Americans were trying to direct their country, say in the late 1930s, far from it. So it's an interesting thing that happens to the country, that it winds up sort of reinventing itself every 84 years. And since Uranus is going to enter Gemini again in the year 2025, and it's going to be there until the early 2030s, we see the chance for this to sort of come up again, or at least the book sort of anticipates, I suppose, that coming again. I wouldn't say I predict it happening because I don't get that specific. I leave it sort of open-ended. I try not to pretend I have any sort of special insight into the future other than what I can, glimmer from astrological cycles. But based on what's happened so far, I suppose I have every reason to at least expect that from the mid-2020s into the early 2030s, that the United States can find itself involved in yet another war, but one that ultimately results in its reinvention, just was the case the last 3 times.
Right, and we'll also be dealing with Pluto and Aquarius then, and I've looked at Aquarius cycles through history, and those are periods of massive change, and it doesn't really matter. It does matter to some extent. Saturn and outward, when there is a planet aspecting Aquarius, there is a pretty significant change on the horizon. Back in between 1942 and 1949, you also have the very strong imprint of FDR and the New Deal and the implementation of that. And the country was really of 2 minds during that time. Charles Lindbergh gave a pretty impassioned speech about non-intervention in World War II, and he and Roosevelt were kind of mortal enemies around this whole interventionist policy. And obviously the Rooseveltian sort of progressive democratic quasi-socialist mindset won out over that debate and intervention. But here we have duality sort of shaping up in the psyche of the public consciousness. How do you cover that in the book, and what was your take on just really how divided the country was at that time?
Yeah, well, there are a number of factors that lead up to that. One thing is, for instance, just to look at the American left. The American left was as isolationist as the American right until Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June of 1941. If you know about guys like Woody Guthrie, Woody Guthrie famously had a sticker on his guitar that said, "This machine kills fascists." Well, Woody Guthrie, for instance, was an isolationist, did not believe in entering the war until Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union, at which point he supported American intervention in the war. And then, of course, you have the American right, who was also quite, resistant and had a strong isolationist bent until the bombing of Pearl Harbor, at which point pretty much most of the country was on board for involvement in the war. And as far as Roosevelt's concerned, I mean, he simply, because he had so many facts at his disposal, he knew a little ahead of everyone else that war was likely. He simply didn't have the luxury to be in denial about it the way, your average citizen did. And that's what that comes down to. And of course, Roosevelt was an Aquarius, as I believe was Lindbergh.
That's right.
And Roosevelt, this is another interesting thread I pull out in the book in terms of Aquarius and its involvement with Uranus and Gemini. There's this very interesting thread I pull out involving the use of solar returns. Now, some of your listeners might know, some may have heard the phrase. A solar return is what an astrologer, it's basically a birthday chart. Every year of a person's life, we look at a chart for when, basically within a day or so of a person's birthday, when the sun returns to the same degree it was at the moment of a person's birth, and we analyze that chart in terms of relative to events for that coming year. Well, there's this very interesting thing that happens in all three chapters of my book. During the American Revolution, I look at Thomas Paine, who was the voice, if you will, of the American Revolution when he wrote Common Sense in 1776. Well, in 1776, Thomas Paine, who had the sun in Aquarius, 1776 was the year that in his solar return, Uranus was making a direct station. That is to say that Uranus had been retrograde right up until the day of his birthday, and it was moving direct on the day of his birthday in 1776 when he wrote Common Sense. Then if we jump ahead to 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who was an Aquarius, he had Uranus stationed direct in his solar return for 1860, the year that the United States got involved in the Civil War. And Abraham Lincoln was, if you will, and he was president, but he was also, if you will, the voice of the Civil War. And then jump ahead to the 1940s, Franklin Roosevelt had Uranus stationed direct in his solar return in 1941. And again, I would say Roosevelt, besides being president, was the American voice of the Second World War. So you have this interesting thread involving the solar returns. My book is not just a history book in terms of strictly political events or battles, although that's certainly included as well. The book includes a lot of different biographical material that is woven into the story, and it is of I would say of great interest to any serious astrologer because it tells you something about stationing planets in a solar return that I find hard to ignore.
One of the other interesting aspects that I find about the cycle that you're talking about is if you go back to Uranus and Aries, you have this massive explosion of technological development, all these amazing inventions, for better or worse, are discovered and patented, and a lot of them will have a great impact on the 20th century. And then we go into Uranus in Taurus, and that is sort of the manifestation, the manufacturing, and the kind of the R&D around a lot of this stuff. And then we come into Uranus and Gemini, and it's like, all right, let's figure out how we can use it. Let's drop a bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So we see this kind of arc with Uranus and Aries, and having it getting played out with Uranus and Gemini, and exploring what a lot of this new stuff can do.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. Although in the case of the American military power, it's worth noting, speaking of how, Americans were not aiming to become some kind of global superpower, the American military in the late 1930s was not even training with real guns. They were using wooden guns that fired flour. I kid you not, like baking flour. That's what your training American soldier was doing in 1938, 1939, 1940. And it's industrial power. And the fact that Roosevelt was able to convert all these industrial machinations, these factories and what have you, into weapon-making factories very quickly, that allowed them to do what they did, including what happened in the development of the atom bomb. That being said, I mean, these days indeed, Uranus is in Aries, and Uranus's transit in Aries in all 3 chapters of my book. Although I don't state it overtly in the book, I can certainly confirm out of the research I did for it that once Uranus is in Aries, you tend to see the inevitability of war showing its head. The sort of all the things that lead up to what happens when Uranus is in Gemini is already brewing once Uranus is in Aries. For instance, when you go back to Uranus in Aries in the 1700s, well, this is when the British Crown starts passing these laws that the American colonials are objecting to. It takes quite a while for it to break out into full-blown revolution. But, things like the Stamp Act and what have you, these happen when Uranus is in Aries. It's when the American colonials start to become disgruntled with what the British Crown is doing and how they're being taxed. If you jump ahead to the 1800s, Uranus was in Aries in the late 1840s, early 1850s, and this is when things like the California Compromise is passed. Many people don't realize that the American Civil War almost happened about 10 years earlier, and it was only with the last-ditch compromise over the issue of slavery in California that prevented it from happening. Very interestingly, Henry Clay, the senator who was instrumental in getting the compromise passed, he was an Aries sun who had Uranus and Pluto conjunct, transiting Uranus and Pluto conjunct his sun when he made his plea and got the California Compromise to happen. And similarly, of course, Hitler first came to power in Germany when Uranus was in Aries in 1933. Ultimately, it would be when Uranus made its ingress to Taurus, conjunct his Taurus sun, that he became, de facto, dictator of Germany. But when he was first elected Chancellor of Germany was in 1933 when Uranus was in Aries. And a lot of the things in terms of fascism and of course, the Great Depression, all these different factors that led to the Second World War happening occurred while Uranus was in Aries. So by the time we're in Uranus and Aries, there's some amount of foreshadowing, I'd say, in terms of the inevitable crisis once Uranus does reach Gemini in all 3 cases in the book.
Yep. And a lot of the technological development that takes place during Uranus and Aries in the run-up to World War II is actually happening on the German side as well. That's where a lot of the real quote-unquote juicy stuff was taking place.
Exactly.
Let's get into some other Uranus cycles, just touching around Uranus. Uranus goes from Gemini into Cancer, and this is really sort of the launching point for a lot of the baby boomers. They've got Uranus and Cancer redefining a lot of very Cancerian issues in their lifetime. They also have Pluto and Leo. What do you want to share about the Uranus in Cancer generation?
Yeah, it's crucial because, as I said, Uranus in Gemini tends to involve the United States fighting wars that lead to the nation reinventing itself. But that reinvention tends to occur when Uranus is in Cancer. So it's absolutely linked. It's not just about the fact that Uranus is in Gemini when these wars happen. When the wars end, Uranus goes into Gemini and the country becomes a whole new place. With 1949, by the time Uranus goes into Gemini, you have returning soldiers benefiting from the GI Bill. And that in turn creates, you suddenly get a whole new educated population in the United States, and these soldiers also get loans to buy homes in the suburbs. And of course, some of these soldiers are not white, so suddenly you have black and other people of color, Americans who fought in the war. They're benefiting from the GI Bill, and they're moving into these suburbs and integrating neighborhoods, which of course is a whole foreshadowing of what's going to happen in the 60s in the civil rights movement. So there's all these, and this similar things happen, of course, at the end of the Civil War. You had Reconstruction. You had a similar sort of reshaping of the political and physical landscape of the United States, and you have a population of people enjoying new sort of benefits, legal benefits that were unavailable to them prior to the war. Albeit, Reconstruction was not an indefinite operation, but nonetheless, you see these similar things happening with the country and where it seems to be heading with the end of these wars. So Uranus in Cancer, I think, if anything, has more to do with the reshaping of the United States than Uranus in Gemini. Uranus in Gemini is more about what leads up to this reshaping, the hows and whys and wherefores behind the reshaping of the nation.
Yep, absolutely. Following Uranus in Cancer, you've got the Uranus in Leo generation, which I'm a part of. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like Uranus was not in Leo for very long during that phase. It felt like Uranus was in Virgo for a lot longer than Uranus in Leo. Is that right?
No, it's not. I know why it would seem like that. Uranus spends pretty much 7 years in all the signs. It's not like Pluto. Pluto's got a weird orbit so Pluto will spend much longer in Taurus than any other sign, and it sort of zips through Scorpio in under a decade or about a decade. So that Pluto's really weird that way. But Uranus very evenly, very elegantly spends about 7 years in each of the 12 tropical signs. Uranus was in Leo from 1955 until 1962. It made the first ingress into Virgo in November of 61, and then the second one in August of 62. So I think that the thing is because I think the reason you have the perception you do is because the 60s seem like this, the 60s being what they were, a lot of stuff happened and a lot of things changed very quickly. And so it seems like a longer period. But really, Uranus was in Virgo from 62 to 69, or even late 68 for the first ingress. So it's really just a 7-year window, but a very interesting one. And actually, those ingresses into Virgo really tell you a lot. November of 1961, when Uranus makes its first ingress to Virgo, I'm just going to rattle off a bunch of things that happened in November of 1961. First of all, the very first American advisors, military advisors, arrive in Vietnam. The first involvement whatsoever of American military in Vietnam occurs Halloween of 1961, effectively, November of 61. In the first week of November 61 in Liverpool, England, a record store manager goes into this little teeny bopper club in the basement and sees a rock band, these four guys in leather jackets, and decides he's going to manage them. And of course, that's the Beatles, and they're going to have quite to do, with how things play out in the 60s. Jimi Hendrix joins the Air Force in November of 1961, and of course, that's going to send him into the South, and he's going to hear a lot of music he's never heard before, and it's going to be what introduces him to his career as a professional musician. And I could go on and on and on. All the different players of who's going to be important in the 1960s, culturally and politically, they're all doing very interesting things as Uranus enters Virgo in 61, 62.
Now, I'm assuming you have the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in your chart. Is that right?
I was born in 1968, so yeah, they're quite close to being conjunct still. They're about 6 degrees apart in my birth chart, yeah.
So maybe it's because there's that conjunction or that dance between Uranus and Pluto that goes on throughout most of the 60s that seems to give the Uranus and Virgo aspect a little more gravitas or a lot more energy around it. Can you talk a little bit about the Uranus-Pluto conjunction and what your interpretation of that is, and how you think it's impacted culture?
Absolutely. First off, I'd say that's absolutely true. The fact that Uranus was conjunct Pluto during the 1960s says so much about why the 60s were what they were, for better and for worse. It certainly did give the Uranus transit through that sign a lot more gravitas. It's not just a matter of Uranus being in Virgo. It's the fact that it was co-present with another, big outer planet, a slow-moving outer planet at that time. What I will say about Uranus, when Uranus enters any sign, any of the 12 tropical signs, what it tends to do is pervert the nature of that sign. And by that I mean it takes the values associated with a given tropical sign and it sort of turns them upside down. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. With the 60s, Virgo is the sign of good taste, if you will, quote unquote. When Uranus likes music, it likes the great classics. When it likes literature, it wants, Dickens or Shakespeare. When it comes to art, it wants the Dutch masters or something of that nature. So what happens? Uranus goes into Virgo. Literally, in November of 61, okay, you've got the Beatles are going to be a big thing. So you've got this teeny bopper rock and roll band who are going to become the great composers of the age. The first Marvel comic, The Fantastic Four, is published in November 1961. So going back to my making a graphic novel, you have comic books are going to suddenly become the great literature of that century. And in August of 62, with the second ingress into Virgo, Andy Warhol is he's doing his Campbell soup cans and his silk screen portraits of Marilyn Monroe, who dies in August of 62. So you've got Andy Warhol's, art becoming the great art of the decade. Now, this is not what Virgo wants. Virgo does not want, pop groups being great composers or comic books being great literature or pop art a la Warhol being the great, fine art of the age. But that's what Uranus and Virgo does, is it takes those values and turns them upside down. And I find that that's what Uranus does regardless of what sign it goes into. For instance, in this day and age, Uranus is in Aries. Well, what is Aries? Aries is the sign of the singular leader, right, the individual. Well, what happened when Uranus went into Aries was we had the Occupy movements and the Arab Spring. And this is very common. This is what also happened in previous Uranus ingresses into Aries, is you have the masses rising up like an individual. You have these effectively leaderless movements. The Occupy movement didn't have a Napoleon or a Robespierre or a Hitler or whoever, a Ronald Reagan. It didn't have that sort of that person who leads the way. It was just the people rising up like a singular force. And this perverts, it's fine. It might be what you like, what I like, what a lot of people like, but it's not what Aries likes. And that's really the point there. Uranus goes into that sign and it turns that thing all around. And that's been a consistent thing whenever Uranus has been in Aries.
It seems like it's the radical invocation of the opposite, right? I mean, that's, I think, what takes place, because when you talk about the perversion of value in Virgo, the opposite would be Pisces, which would be,
right.
Theoretically messy, art as anything goes. There are no values. There are no boundaries. I was watching the documentary about cinema on Netflix, and it always escapes my mind what the name of the thing is. But he gets it. The guy who narrates it talks about this period of cinema during the 60s, and he gets into this film I Am Curious Yellow, which breaks all these boundaries about what cinema is about. The main character in the film has this dialogue with Martin Luther King on screen, and it's really outrageous in terms of what it does. And now we have with the Uranus and Aries, the radical invocation of the opposite, which would be Libra, and the whole Occupy movement and some of the color revolutions. They all feel like they're very Libran-based and Libran charged. Of course, Saturn was in Libra during that time, so we would get an extra kind of push around that. What about things like, right now, over the course of the last 24 hours, really, this whole concept and notion of drones delivering pizzas and burritos and PlayStations to your house is breaking ground in our consciousness and our psyches. And we're starting to see, again, which would be the radical invocation of the opposite, maybe with Uranus and Aries, sort of the rise of robotic or cybernetic culture instead of the human, the non-human. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's it's one of these things. Not unlike when I first found the internet in the '90s, where technology seems to be going in a direction that I never would have dreamed possible until it was in front of my face. So I'm not always I still find myself in a state of shock when these things arise. With hindsight, they always seem inevitable, and you realize that they were coming for a long time before their appearance. But it's always something of a shock. But I'd say you're right, essentially, that that there is definitely something about Uranus and Aries and this drone phenomenon, because we're creating a new kind of individual, I suppose, is the thing. And a new means to identify it. I mean, I think Aries has a lot to do with sort of individual identification, and and that's what I'd say comes out of that technology. Of course, since we're in a Uranus-Pluto square, whenever Uranus is interacting with Pluto, these tend to be the far more than Uranus being in any given sign. Uranus interacting with Pluto has a lot to do with massive technological advancement, as it does with Neptune back in the early '90s when Uranus was conjunct Neptune. Things changed pretty quickly back then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just recently, we were just kind of hopscotching around a little bit with Uranus and getting to the whole cycle resonance. Just over the last 48 hours, Nick, I was looking at the Uranus and Sagittarius cycle, 1973, right around there, where it was conjunct Neptune. And I noted that there was an explosion of cinema and stage that was centered around the portrayal of the life of Jesus during this year. I take that back. It was Jupiter. My bad. It was Jupiter Sagittarius conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius in 1973. Yeah, that's a really fast.
I think that's 1971. Sorry,
71.
Robert. 71 is when Jupiter was conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius. Yeah, Uranus didn't enter Sagittarius until the 80s. Although I would say when it was close, when it was with Saturn in Sagittarius, that's when you had the Last Temptation of Christ coming out. So I still think these combinations of slower planets in Sagittarius does have something to do, because I guess what you're getting at is Jesus Christ Superstar in '73.
Absolutely. Now that has the first performance of that is in 1970, and obviously Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber are cooking that idea up prior to 1970. I would say maybe early 1969. Coming out of the Summer of Love. And then it has Inception in 70.
Yeah, before there was the movie, there was the record. Ian Gillan of Deep Purple sang the role of Jesus on the original record of the show.
Right.
And that's recorded around 71, 72 when Jupiter and Neptune are in Sagittarius. Ian Gillan, I was fortunate enough, I once emailed Ian Gillan and asked him what time he was born, and he was kind enough to ask his mother and get back in touch with me, and his rising sign is Sagittarius.
Interesting.
So yeah, and 1971 is also when Deep Purple did Smoke on the Water, but let's not get distracted by that. The point being that he was being singled out to sing the role of Jesus in Jesus Christ Superstar when he had that Jupiter Neptune stuff going, right around his rising sign and his ascendant.
So this is just another example of this absolutely delicious and juicy and mind-melting, panoply of event and person and experience and date that is really running through astrology all the time. And once you get into it, it is really a trip.
Yeah. It's for me, it's a means of understanding all different facets of human existence. Our politics, our art, our general evolution, be it technologically or consciously. It's the whole kit and caboodle. It tells me more about our species than any other kind of discipline. There's something about astrology that is it's also a combination of disciplines. I think it's something that allows us to develop our knowledge in a number of different sciences, be they the science of history or the science of technology or sociology. It combines all these things. It applies, wherever you aim it. It has an application.
It is definitely a multidisciplinary art form, for sure. So if people want to find out about the book, Nick, where can they go?
My website is nickdaganbest.com. That's NICKDAGANBEST.com. The book is available in both print and electronic formats. So whatever floats your boat, you can get that format. I'm working on some other books. So hopefully 2014 we'll see one or two additions to my literary canon. But for the time being, Uranus USA makes an excellent stocking stuffer for people with book-shaped feet, I suppose. And I hope your listeners come check it out.
Yeah, for everybody that's out there celebrating Saturnalia, check it out. It would make a very nice gift. You've got Uranus transit in your 9th house currently, is that right?
I do. It was conjunct my North Node as I published this book, so it's my 9th house, all right.
Beautiful timing. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with after this, Nick. Great stuff. Love the historical narrative and thread and the meta running through it all. Let's get you back on sometime again, maybe after you publish your next work or you're doing something interesting. Stay in touch with us. We'd love to have you back on.
Oh, thank you, Robert. This has been a great time. Thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed it.
It looks like my next guest, Michael Lee Hill, is ready and waiting to go. Before I bring him on, again, I want to try to give him a bit of a wind-up here. He is a musician, and a pretty good one. In fact, I'm going to play a piece of his music later in the show. It's an instrumental piece that he sent me. He's a musician, and he's a UFO experiencer/chaser, and that's sort of the term that I'm coining, at least. And he seems like a really interesting individual. So without further ado, let's bring Michael on the air. Hello, Michael.
Hey, how you doing, Robert?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic.
Well, good. You are. I wouldn't say this is your 15 minutes of fame, but your profile is certainly on the rise in the alternative news circles these days. How's that going for you in terms of being on these different radio shows and people wanting to hear your story and your experience with the UFOs?
It's really just taking off right now. It's been pretty incredible, actually. The cover.
Sorry about that. That was I tried to play some music, and unfortunately, I played my old interview with Stephen Michael Hill. So, hey, what's happening? I'm back. Damn. That was a great interview. Nick was a terrific guest, and I love dishing history, especially when there are astrological cycles involved. Check out his website, nickdaganbest.com, and look for his book, Uranus USA. I apologize for dropping out there for a moment, and it was an unfortunate, strange series of events. All of a sudden, I was talking, and then I was cut off. All right, let's take a call here. Let's go to looks like a Skype line. They've been on here for about 50 minutes. Let's talk to them. Hello there. Hello. Oh, they're just listening. Let's go to another caller, 803. Hello there.
How's it going?
Oh, it's better now that I'm back on the air. How's it going with you?
Oh, pretty good. I said I would call and get a mini reading.
All right, cool. What's your name?
My name is Chris.
Hey, Chris. And where are you calling from?
I'm calling from South Carolina.
South Carolina. All right, let's dial up the ephemeris here and get you in. Check out what we can check out with you. Let's see. Hold on a second. Here we go. All right, we're almost there. We're almost in the zone. And we are there now. All right. Chris, why don't you go ahead and give me your birth date and where you were born and all that stuff.
Okay, 12/24/76, Washington, D.C.
12/24/1976. And what time was that?
10:24.
AM or PM?
PM.
PM. 10:24. All right. Okay. December 24th, 1976, Washington, D.C. There we go. Let's do this. And there you are. Okay. Scorpio rising, sun in Capricorn, and moon in Aquarius. What's on your mind today, Chris?
Romance. You say any women coming into my life soon?
Well, let's see. When we look at the chart for romance, the two areas that obviously as an astrologer I look at are the 5th house and the 7th house. So you have that Virgo rising, which means you're picky, in particular about who you let into your life. So it's not always about when, but it's about your willingness to either, I would say, perhaps relax some of your standards, or hold on to somebody that really matches up with the type of person that you want in your life. Now, if it's the latter, then you're going to go through periods where you're not going to have too many serious prospects in your life. But if it's the former and you relax your standards, then you can run into some confusion and settling for somebody who may not necessarily be in your best interest. You've got Pisces on the descendant, and when Pisces is there in the descendant, we can let just about anybody in that house, and not always towards its best effect. What you're really looking for with Pisces on the 7th house descendant is you're looking for a spiritual mate or a spiritual partner, somebody that you can really trust and dissolve into. Because Virgo on the ascendant does have some trust issues. You know, Virgo on the ascendant is really a very sensitive sign, and what they don't want to do is they don't want to let somebody come into their life and into that 7th house and disrupt what I would call their rhythm of perfection, or the rhythm of their life, which moves towards the refinement of the personality through the ascendant. Now, the good news here is there's Pluto in Capricorn, and Pluto gets to 12 degrees Capricorn this year. When I say this year, I'm talking about 2014 coming up. So you're going to have a Pluto ascendant trine in 2014. And when we have the Pluto ascendant trine, especially in an Earth sign, what that does to us is that gives us the impression of looking more solid, looking more magnetic, looking more attractive in some ways. And it also represents kind of the culmination of working on your persona and how you appear to the world. So, for instance, between now and the middle part of 2012, you could be doing things like working out. You could be changing your sense of fashion, your sense of style, your diet, all of these things which would transform your persona and how you appear to the world. And when Pluto's going to be trining your ascendant for a while. It's already there now. It's 3 degrees off your ascendant, but it reaches kind of a peak and a culmination in mid-2014. So what you're going to be going through during that time is you're going to be going through this realization that all the changes and all of the work that you put to developing yourself is paying off. And then what happens as a result of that is that people, especially women, will see the new you or the new Chris, right? And that's when you want to be open to the type of influence and confluence in your life and in your chart. Because I would say that between now and then, you are still in this process of transformation. But the moment of recognition takes place for you in mid-2014 when you reach this phase in this cycle where you're not perfect, but you've done a lot of work. You've adjusted your diet. You've worked out. You've adjusted your thoughts. You've adjusted your mind. And you feel confident enough to let somebody into your life. And that's what I see for you. It's mid-2014 when this comes into play. Now, you've got a whole other cycle underneath that with Jupiter moving into Leo, and that happens in June of 2014, and that really lights up your social life because you've got Jupiter in the 11th house right now in Cancer, but when it moves into Leo, you're going to be in demand. There's going to be a lot of parties, a lot of celebrations. You'll be able to go on a nice vacation even during that time. So, again, the prospects of meeting somebody with this Jupiter cycle in your 11th house in Leo are also nicely highlighted. So that's my take. I would say mid-2014, when you've got that really sweet Pluto transit to your ascendant and you're looking good and you're feeling good, and you find the refinement of who you are at that time reflected back to you in another person.
Okay. Well, thanks a lot.
All right, Chris. Take care. Call back again sometime.
All right.
Thank you. All right. That's Chris. Let's take another call. Hello there.
Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
You're on the air.
This is Lauren.
Hey, Lauren, you're back.
I am back. Thank you for taking my call.
Yeah, thanks for your persistence in calling in. So here we are. Let's get into who you are. When's your birthday?
March 28th, 64.
Okay. Alrighty. 1964. And where was that?
Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. Okay. And what time?
10:35 p.m.
All right. There's a lot of Daytons in the United States.
Yeah, I guess there are.
All right. March 28th, 1964. Here we go. There you are. Scorpio ascendant and Neptune conjunct your ascendant by 5 degrees. Of course, you are an Aries sun. That's at 8 degrees, and your moon is in the lovely sign of Libra. Okay, what's on your mind?
It's just been a really difficult time.
A difficult time?
I'm going through a therapy process.
You're going through what?
Therapy.
That's, that's actually a really, really good sign that you're going through therapy.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Saturn is going through your 12th house now. And anytime Saturn goes through the 12th house, it's a process of psychic dredging.
It is dredging.
Yeah, and so it's good. You're doing the work. You're doing the work that Saturn is sharing with you that you need to do. Now, here's the good news. You're almost done.
Really?
Because, by the end of the year, Saturn is up to 20 degrees. When 2014 rolls around, it goes into 21st, 22nd, 23rd. So I would say in January, it's going to feel for you like you're coming up for air, like significant breakthrough. Significant breakthrough in your internal process. Now, the thing is, right, you are in a metamorphosis. When Saturn goes through the 12th house, it is a chrysalis phase.
Mm-hmm.
And and this is really important, when Saturn breaks through the membrane of the 12th onto the ascendant and into the first, you want to take your time. Because even though you feel like you have come through something very significant, it doesn't mean that you have to change your life immediately and start doing things that you hadn't done before. Take your time. It's like again, we'll dip into the life cycle of the butterfly. You break the chrysalis. The chrysalis is broken. The wings come out. The wings are still wet. They're still drying. It's not ready to quite fly yet. So I would say that even though you'll have more of a sense of liberation and freedom than you've had over the past 2 years, or year and a half at least, take your time and make your moves very, I wouldn't say in a calculated way, but in an informed way, so that you don't rush through your process. So the good news is that you're almost done. You're almost cooked. And take your time. The big thing is that when Saturn gets up to 22 degrees, 23 degrees, it opposes your natal Venus in Taurus. And one of the last, I would say, stations as part of this cycle of transformation for you is deep understanding, deep observance of the role of relationship in your life, either current relationships or past relationships. You have one more pass over a significant, or it's not over a significant relationship, but you have one more pass where you deeply explore and examine a very significant relationship in your life. Perhaps maybe one that triggered this transit and this exploration of the 12th house. And that could mean one of two things. It could mean you leave that relationship. It could mean that you resurrect and return to that relationship. Actually, three things. Or it could mean that you go out and create an entirely different type of relationship in your life. And I'm thinking it's probably the last one, because what we're looking at here is Venus in a fixed sign, your ascendant in a fixed sign, and Saturn coming through and opposing Venus and really probing it and hopefully flipping the polarity or flipping the duality so that any type of relationship that you move into or move back into, whatever it may be, is different. It's a different type of relationship. It's one that really nurtures you on that sort of Taurus level that you really require with it hanging out right on your descendant. So, you have really the resurrection of the self, but you also have, in some ways, the resurrection of the idea of relationship in your life simultaneously.
Wow. It's really amazing.
Well, it's good. You're doing your work, and one of the things that you've got is you have a Neptune-Venus opposition natally in your chart, and that's tough because Neptune is hanging out in your 12th house. That's where it lives. So it's really hard to get a handle on Neptune sometimes, but where it gets played out, where deception of self, deception of motivation, and even deception of others, it gets played out in personal relationships, one-on-one relationships. That's when you really have to deal with the neglected Neptune or the unexamined Neptune. And you, by going through therapy, have gotten into your Neptune. You've gotten into what motivates you. You've gotten into the kind of the psychic hooks. You've gotten into why you might have chosen relationships that have been illusory or deceptive, or have chosen people that have been dependent, or why you have at times shown up as the one who's become dependent upon the other for whatever reason, and whether it happened in childhood or some other experience in your life. This is all part of your Saturn cycle as well. So this is good stuff. You're going to break through, and you're going to start to choose different types of relationships based on all this work that you've been doing.
I mean, that makes all kinds of sense. It seems that I'm dealing with some repressed memories, which is a little bit intimidating and scary. But I'm committed to the process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little overwhelming.
Well, when you get into the whole repressed memory peace. And obviously I think we're talking about stuff like abuse or, transgressions that have been hidden from you. And by the way, that does play out in your chart.
I thought it did.
Well, the one thing obviously the person that you're working with who's helping you get through the repressed memory cycle, the repressed memories, period, it has to be incredibly trustworthy. And the key here is not necessarily experiencing the repressed memory, although that's important. It's resolving the repressed memory. Because what you don't want to do, or what your practitioner doesn't want to do, and I'm sure they're quite good at what they do, that you don't want to open that can of worms and then have it living with you again without some kind of resolution. The resolution piece is really critical. And if you can get in there and you can zap it and cauterize it and go through whatever you need to go through, the grief, the forgiveness, whatever that is, then you can move on. And it's no longer repressed. It's out in the lights. And then you can own it, you can claim it, and there's a great deal of empowerment with that. And that, to me, is Saturn coming into the first house. That's really the Saturn energy, the Saturn focus of owning that scorpionic stuff that happens in the 12th with Neptune there. What's hidden, behind the scenes, but beneath the surface, all those energies which are really getting dredged and uprooted during this Saturn cycle. So good for you. Congratulations on doing the work. It's challenging. It's certainly strange, painful. But really, what you want to shoot for is not just knowing that it's there, but dealing with the resolution of what's there. Now, that will happen in its own time. Certainly, I think it will happen when Saturn is in your first house, and ultimately, it will be a great benefit to you in your quest for a relationship that will nurture and support you, which is Venus and Taurus in the 7th.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Okay, I'm looking forward to the resolution.
Well, it's good. When you have Jupiter transiting your 6th house in Cancer, and the 6th house is ruled by Scorpio, and Scorpio is all about the journey to the underworld and plumbing the depths of the psyche, and Jupiter is where we find the benefit and all that stuff. So you're actually benefiting from the Jupiter in 8th house transit. And you are kind of, in some ways, a scorpionic figure because your true node is in the 8th house. So you're a deep diver, and you're being rewarded for your deep dive with the Jupiter transit in your 8th. So that's good.
That's good to hear.
Yeah. And
okay, I'll stay encouraged.
You've got Pluto at 12 degrees Virgo, and there's a Pluto trine, that's going to happen for you from now through 2014, and even into 2015. And the Pluto trine is very dynamic, and it will help you in whatever career that you're in, or even remaking or starting a new career for that matter. So you have a huge amount of opportunity opening up for you between now and the middle part of 2015. And that all has to do with the type of work you do and where you want to take it.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
That sounds positive.
And Uranus, we were just talking about Uranus in the first part of the show. Uranus is just moving off of your sun now, which is not bad. It's an interesting aspect. And Uranus is in your 5th house. And it has the Uranus 5th house transit opens you up to all kinds of crazy types of new ways of falling in love, or new ways of being titillated, or new ways of exploring your passion. So that's open for you as well.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
All right, Lauren. Take care and enjoy your Saturn transit.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Robert.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Let's go to 540. Hello there. You're on
Hello,
the air.
Robert.
Who's this?
Hello, Robert.
Eric.
This is Eric.
Eric, I knew it. I could tell. What's going on, man?
Well, a lot of different things. I've been doing some healing work lately on myself.
Yeah.
I mentioned this in your chat room to some people who took me up on it. I'm doing this ancestral karmic healing process. and it's kind of brought me to a new level of clarity. And I've been doing a lot of Reiki and energy healing with other people, but even having done all that, just kind of really making me feel a new level of energy. So, but I'm curious what you might see for me going ahead next year in terms of healing and maybe romance.
Healing and romance. Okay, so you know what I'm going to have to do? Oh, there you are. I checked your chart. I thought I wiped your chart. There you are. Hold on. Okay, well, let's see. It's kind of interesting. This goes back to Chris, the original caller, who started off the second part of today's show. You've got the same thing going on, man. You've got the Pluto trine Virgo ascendant. His ascendant was 12 Virgo. Yours is 10, so Pluto's closer. And Pluto is going to be moving into your 5th house. So you're going to have the Pluto ascendant trine, which again is like all the stuff that you've been doing and working on, the healing work, the Reiki work. I mean, all these things are kind of in alignment with that Pluto ascendant trine, right? You're kind of redefining who you are, what you do, what's important to you in the world. And, when we have that Pluto trine to the ascendant, we send out a signal to the world, just like I was sharing with Chris, that attracts a different type of individual, or an individual that shows up in a different kind of way than they had before. Because really what you're doing is you're honing and refining, how you project into the world, especially when it's in the sign of Virgo. So in the early part of 2014, we're talking January, this reaches a peak for you because that's when Pluto is at 10 degrees. So this kind of all this work and this sort of these moments of refinement and perfection reach the perfect pitch in the first part of 2014. Now, that would result in recognition. Somebody recognizing who you are, somebody recognizing your essence, your spirit, just like I was sharing with Chris. And for you, this has been going down in the 4th house. You've been doing a lot of this at home study, homework, redefining your relationship with home. You like where you live, your mother, redefining your relationship with your mother, your grandmother, all these people that are 4th house manifestations. Now, Pluto is moving into the 5th for you in 2014, and it's going to stay there for quite a while. So the 5th house is the house of romance and passion and hobbies and children and art, and that's where Pluto is going to be taking up residence. So it's transforming everything you've known about who you are and what's important to your heart as a result of this. Now, how it shows up, whenever we deal with Pluto cycles, and especially in the 5th house, we look at what color or what shades the 5th house, and you've got Capricorn there. So it's about transforming the type of person that you would fall in love with or that you would open your heart to. And when we deal with Capricorn, we're looking at sort of what I would call the kind of the exaggeration of the age spectrum. And it's kind of a cliche, but I've seen it hold true. Capricorn deals with either issues of infirmity or maturity or aging, or it goes in the other direction of youth. So the type of person that would be attracted to you during this Pluto moving into your 5th house Capricornian cycle would be either be somebody older than you or younger than you. So you would open up your heart to those types of possibilities, that kind of spectrum. So, if you're into this and interested in exploring Pluto deeply in your 5th house, you would open up and explore the type of relationship or the possibility of the type of relationship that would be available to you. So you would say, okay, well maybe I would be open to being with somebody who's in their early 20s, or maybe I'd be open to somebody who's in their mid-50s. This is what I'm talking about. And you've got your moon in Capricorn in the 5th house, so it can suggest that you would come to love and romance, obviously, later in life. It would also suggest that you would have the potential of opening yourself up emotionally to the type of experience that I'm talking about, somebody older or somebody younger. So this is just coming into fruition in 2014. And it really is kicked off by this distillation and perfection of your identity through the ascendant with the Pluto trine.
Oh, wow. Well, the reason why I asked about romance to begin with was because of something that happened to me in late January of this year. It was a astral dream time connection. It was very intense with some kind of, all I know, it was a female entity that I have yet to identify. And it was just like a very powerful, energetic connection. Actually, it kind of went into like the sexual level of connection of sorts. But and like after I got conscious about it, it was like I felt like this energy through me for like 15 minutes afterwards.
Yeah.
And I did, ever since that happened, I've been kind of wondering, okay, well, what is that? I don't think that was just a random event. So I think it's something that is leading into the future. But I haven't yet identified exactly who I connected with. And I've been offered the opinion at one time that it was someone who was of a Pleiadian soul nature, of some Nordic incarnation race. I know that's probably very out there, but so I don't know. I kind of wondered whether that at all would play into what you were saying about Pluto in the 5th house and what you were saying about Capricorn.
It could be. You have your Venus is in your 12th house in Leo. So the types of relationships that you would be attracted to would be kind of, in some ways, what you're talking about. These would be relationships that would be hyper-imaginal, or there would be, in some ways, very, very spiritual and etheric. That's a very strong placement for that kind of relationship, Venus in the 12th house. But your Venus also is in sextile with Uranus, which would indicate that you would have very unusual relationships. And these relationships would be kind of existing in the 12th house, but would come out every now and then to manifest with that Uranus aspect in Scorpio and utterly change your life as a result of it. So, unconventional relationships certainly play a role in this. And, when we look at, the Pluto ingress into the 5th house, then we're talking about, again, that kind of wide spectrum of age, either, much older or much younger than you. So I think you're in a good place, man. Just keep working on the refinements of your healing gifts and healing abilities. Allow that to come more into play through your ascendant, which you're doing, and offering up these ancestral healings and things like that. And what's going to happen is that your signal will attract the type of person who will really be into it, and then you'll be fine. Just continue to be natural. Allow this Pluto transit to transform your identity and how you appear to the world.
Okay, that sounds very enlightening, and I appreciate all your insights today, Robert.
Hey, you're welcome, man, and keep doing what you're doing. The world's a better place for it. I guarantee it. Thanks, Eric.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right, let's take one more call here. Let's go to the 937 line. Hello there. Hello. You're on the air. Gone in 15 seconds. Okay, so you're listening to Navigating the Astrological Matrix. I'm Robert Phoenix, and I am wired at a big fat cup of coffee. I'm thinking about giving up coffee. What do you think? Should I give it up? Should I let it go? I might do it. I might do it. By the way, I'm drinking out of an owl cup. Owl and a spider web behind the owl. How illuminated is that? In the bottom of the cup it says Gates, Gates, Gates Ware, W-A-R-E. Maybe Gates should maybe she should counsel me on my thoughts around ditching coffee. What do you think, Gates? Is that a sign? Let's take another call. Hello there.
That's just me again, Robert. I was calling in to listen.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll put you back on hold there.
Thanks.
There we go. All righty. So let me see. What does Gate 7 say about me ditching coffee? What does she have to say about that? She's leaving. Everybody's leaving now. Okay. All right. Well, I'll tell you what. Since people are leaving and there's no other calls on the line, maybe I will say adieu, since I do have other things to accomplish over the course of the next hour. Okay, so I want to thank Nick Dagan for coming on the show. It was a great interview, totally fascinating, and I completely vibe with his take on history and astrological cycles. Check him out at nickdaganbest.com. Go look for his book, Uranus, USA, and tap into that. I think it'll make a great Saturnalia stocking stuffer. I'll be back on Friday, and I'm going to have Andrew Norton Weber on the show. We're going to talk about water. We're going to get into water on Friday. So don't miss that show. He knows a lot about water. He knows a lot more about water than I do, a lot more about water than a lot of us do. Combined. So that's on Friday, Andrew Norton Weber. Until then, you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. This is Robert Phoenix. I will see you all on Friday, and have a very great rest of your week.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.